I'm going to talk about 46 Combat Support Hospital, which was the unit that I was assigned to when we went over to Saudi Arabia in support of Operation Desert Shield, Desert Storm. The 46 Combat Support Hospital is a 200-bed field hospital. It was set up in tents and is a totally mobile unit. Our 200 beds consists of X-ray laboratory, radiology. We have 8 operating rooms, as well as all support services that keep the hospital operational. We were notified to deploy to Saudi Arabia about the 17th of August, which was only about 2 weeks after Kuwait was invaded. So you can imagine all the turmoil we had to go through and get ready to go, get the people ready to go, get the equipment ready to go, as well as get the equipment down to port so that we could get it on the ship to get to Saudi. I went to Saudi and arrived in country about the 26th of September, 27th of September, with the main body coming over the 13th of October. When the unit arrived in Saudi, the equipment arrived at port approximately 2 or 3 days after the main unit arrived, and we immediately got the equipment off the ship and rolled out to the desert, 150 miles out in the middle of nowhere. And I'm talking nowhere of nothing but sand for miles and miles and miles. We supported the 24th Infantry Division and also the 1st Cavalry Division when we first got to Saudi, because we were the first hospital to deploy into the desert area. There were some units that had gotten to Saudi before we had, but they set up in the Dammam, Dhahran area to support the troops that were coming into country. When we got into the desert area, we set up a hospital, a full 200 beds, and began receiving patients, because even though there wasn't a war started, we still had access from all the units that are deploying, getting their equipment set up, and people just get hurt, as well as all the vehicle accidents that were happening, because Saudi Arabian drivers are crazier than Boston drivers, and there's all kinds of accidents. We saw patients up until the first part of December, when we were issued a new hospital, which is called the Deployable Medical System Hospital, and it's 20-foot containers that are loaded on the back of tractor-trailer trucks. And in this 1-month time frame between December and January, we had to train our people on how to load the equipment up, how to set it up at night, and get used to all this new equipment, as well as doing inventories on the equipment to make sure that we had everything we were supposed to have. When we had the hospital all set up and ready to open the doors on the 1st of January, we had 200 beds of a brand new hospital ready to go to war with. Now, back in the first part of January, we thought that we would be staying in place, that we wouldn't have to move. But as the 15th of January became closer and closer, we found out that we were going to have to move this 200-bed hospital any number of times to support the war. And if you're trying to think of moving a 200-bed hospital, it's a lot of equipment to pack up and move, as well as trying to move the 330 personnel that go along to support the hospital. We packed the hospital up in the early part of February and just kept a basic aid station open to keep sick call and do any emergency services. We went up to the Iraqi border and sat there for 2 weeks before deploying into Iraq on the 26th of February. Because the war was moving so fast, we had to limit the amount of equipment that we could take up, because we could only go into Iraq one time with equipment, because the roads weren't being cleared, the war was going so rapid that we wouldn't be able to set the hospital up, tear it down, move, keep up with the rest of the units, and yet be able to support them with the medical. So we combined 2 hospitals together, making a 400-bed configuration. What the purpose was to have more operating rooms so that we could take care of the casualties that came in faster, and then have a faster return back either to the battlefield or improve the patient evacuation back to the rear. Well, we went into Iraq, and it took us 2.5 days to go 110 miles. The engineers had to clear the roads for us so that we could, first of all, get through the ordnance that had been left behind, but also the terrain was so rough. We went from nice flat sand into heavy boulders and rough terrain, and the vehicles couldn't even cross it. So for 2.5 days, we went through windstorms, sandstorms, rain, everything you can imagine just to go 110 miles. That in itself was an experience. Once we got into Iraq, we sat up the hospital, and we were receiving patients within 4 hours. Within 8 hours, we had 8 operating rooms set up, about 120 beds that would keep patients in overnight, as well as all the support services to go with it. And that's including the laboratory, the x-rays, the laundry services to get the laundry back into the hospital after the operations were done, and getting the fuel and the water to keep this hospital going. Within the first 3 days, we saw a lot of Iraqi POW soldiers. My job as the logistics officer for the unit was to make sure that the transportation for these POWs, even though that they were injured, was provided to them. Either if they had to be evacuated back to the rear further for further medical care, or if they could be treated and turned over to a POW camp. We saw, in the 8 days that we were in Iraq, we saw about 300 Iraqi POWs. And this is between now the 2 units that made up this 400-bed hospital. We saw maybe around 50 American soldiers, and also took care of the grave registration, which is the mortuary portion of the troops that didn't make it. Thank goodness we didn't have very many of those, but that's one of those things that you have to deal with. And our troops did a very good job at taking care of both the Iraqi soldiers and the American soldiers that came through. Even though the war was only 8 days for us, by the time we got ready to come back home, it was amazing the teamwork that everybody developed while we were there. You learned to work with people that you never thought you'd be able to work with before, people you never knew. So here you have the military police, and you have the helicopters that are coming in to not only bring in patients and medical supplies, but you have the helicopters that are providing support, the Apache helicopters and Chinook helicopters, all coming in to be refueled at your hospital because you're the ones that have fuel. You're the only ones that can get water in because you're a hospital. And there's other units that have no support at all. And all of a sudden you're working with people that they just do anything for you. But the teamwork that comes out of it is just phenomenal of how when everybody needs to come together, they can do it. When we packed up to come home, or I should say back to the Iraqi border, after the war was over, we spent 2 weeks getting our equipment cleaned up, sand-free, and then took it back to the port to get ready to be loaded on the ship. The main unit came back from Saudi in April, and then I came back in the middle of May, after we loaded all the equipment back in containers, put it back on the ship, and said goodbye until it reached the States. We still haven't seen all the equipment come back yet, so it's someplace between here and Saudi. The other part of the war that was very interesting was going to see how the Arabs live and their culture. We all heard the stories that before we went over that Saudi Arabian men did not care for American women, that women were second-class citizens and were not treated with respect, which was quite the opposite. I had to deal a lot with the Saudi men because I was a logistics officer and I had to contracts and go out and purchase supplies for the unit. They were very courteous, they were very respectful, they treated me very well, and we made some very good friendships even though it was under pretty harsh circumstances. The biggest surprise was getting over there knowing I couldn't drive, and I always had to have a man with me everywhere I went, and having to be told, you know, you got to keep your elbows covered, and don't look around at the men, you have to be very, very straight. And being in the military, it's kind of hard not to be able to tell a man right next to you that, you know, we're going to go here, we're going to go there. The Saudi men just don't understand that. Their culture for around Christmas time was interesting because they don't practice religion the way we do. So when we had Christmas services, it was in the tents, very quiet, no music. If there was music, it was very soft. And the people that did receive Christmas ornaments through the mail had to keep them inside the tents, which sounds ridiculous because most units were out in the desert 150 miles. But the Saudis would be driving around or be herding their camels through, and they'd see this, and then of course they would tell their police people, and they would come around and they would get on the commanders for displaying religious articles, which was not allowed in the country. The Saudi women, as I said, aren't allowed to drive. They also always have to be totally covered, only their face can be exposed. all the controversy that you heard on TV about you had to have your sleeves down here with 110 degrees temperature was very true in the beginning. But when the war started in January, the Saudis had allowed us to roll up our sleeves, even to let us wear t-shirts when it had been really hot outside. But as soon as the war was over with, the strict customs came back into play. The women, as Americans, were no longer allowed to drive the vehicles that we were allowed to drive while we were at war, and we also had to be escorted by mail all the time after the war was over. Once we returned back in the States, we had to do a complete inventory of all our equipment, get ready to go back to any deployment that we've been told to go to, which we hope will never have to happen again. It's kind of funny in a way that 11 years ago when I came on active duty and hear about this is how you're going to go to war, this is how it works, this is what your mission is, you would think, I wonder if this would really work. And believe it or not, contrary to what you hear on 60 Minutes or CBS or CNN, the system does work. Thank goodness it only lasted a short period of time. I don't know if anybody could take a lot of this combat tension for more than a year or so. It's really difficult. But the Army and the Air Force and the Navy can all work together. And we got our supplies, we took care of the troops, and the troops did their job. It was an experience, but once in a lifetime, definitely enough. We did receive a lot of support from the people back in the States, and we do appreciate all the cards that you sent, the letters, and your prayers and concerns. And it was that support from the Americans back here in the States that helped us get through this. Definitely not like Vietnam. And it was a very positive, reassuring feeling to know that there's people back here that care for you. Again, thank you for letting me talk to you this evening. I'll be glad to talk to you afterwards if you have any specific questions.